All right, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program. And Dooovid is back with me. Dooovid, great to have you aboard. I haven't talked to you in a while. I don't believe that you and I have talked since the October 7th attack on Israel from Gaza, from Hamas. So obviously, a lot's been going on with regard to the state of Israel and toward world Jewry as in general. So um, let's start with that. I mean, talk a little bit about the events of October 7th, the attack on the state of Israel and the slaughter of 1,200 Israelis, and Israel's reaction.
Yeah, well, I mean, good to speak to you, Charles. It might have been almost a year. I mean, obviously, we talked every week for almost 2 years, and then I guess you stopped. Just fell out of doing the weekly program. I saw your some of your programs like on the Jew function and with Ethan Ralph and your debates, and
Mm-hmm.
so good to see you still at it. Yeah, I've been following intensely. Like it was on Simca's Torah, but like I was using a little bit of technology, so I was following on the day it happened. Um, God forbid, it's disaster on all levels. Because I was opposed to the creation of Gaza, the walling off of Gaza. I've been following, like when the March of Return, when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and they had the huge marches and weekly. So I've been following this for a decade, and since October 7th, I've been probably spending like 2 hours a day, like reading and following news casts from all sorts to pure military commentary to politics and
Mm-hmm.
then the encampment in the university protest, which started almost right away, to the escalations and actually building encampments. I haven't been down to University of Michigan, but that's um, a stronghold. So I'm not sure what aspects you want to get into it. Like, I mean, obviously, like I'm a Jew. I'm pro. I guess like I'm an anti-Zionist, so I don't support. I'm not actively opposed to Israel politically, but I think it's a bad idea, and I've always supported a one-state solution, which is very unpopular. And so I see the essential problem as Zionism. But I mean, that's just my own personal view. So, like in terms like I always knew, like October 7th, I followed the news, the Israeli military experts, that October 7th happened was not surprising, because like it was kind of obvious that that's what they always wanted to do. It was maybe more surprising on the Israeli incompetence, and we've debated this in the past where I have been more skeptical of the IDF and their competence in the past, so that wasn't surprising. What's happened past, like, I think this is going to lead to the destruction of Israel and probably like a self implosion for multiple reasons. But I think it was just disastrous for Israel to bomb Gaza. I don't think it helped them. Like on October 8th, I streamed my week in review October the day after, and I was like, do not bomb Gaza. But Israel's been relentlessly bombing Gaza, and they've caused a horrible human rights catastrophe for what I would say is absolutely no benefit to Israel. Israel is not in a better situation since the ground campaign. We could talk the military aspects because I think Israel's kind of like what President Trump is saying. Israel's doing kind of like a half measure where they're really accomplishing nothing. They're not doing strong enough to actually eliminate Hamas. They're doing enough to cause mass casualties and human right catastrophe so that 6 months into it, Israel is in a worse situation militarily. They don't appear to be anywhere closer to eliminating Hamas, and it's just a complete disaster. And you mentioned like the protests and the college encampments and the political fallout, related, um, and it seems that people are just going to keep on doubling down. So there's almost no rationality. Uh, the Israel doesn't have a clear plan on what it's going to do. Even seeing like the news today, like like the U.S. is pausing the shipment, but like what are they pausing? Like the 2,000-pound bombs. and like Israel is still dropping these 2,000-pound bombs. It just seems ludicrous because, like, Hamas is in tunnels, so like all they're doing is inflicting civilian casualties, and they're very little influence on Hamas. And I don't see any way to stop Israel from, someone like I'm, pro-Jewish in the sense like I'm critical of Israel because me being critical of Hamas doesn't really matter. But I don't see them stopping. I think they're just going to keep on doubling down, and it's just a disaster. It's very, upsetting. And then we could talk of the theological implications or various aspects. I'm in your debate. I assume you disagree on numerous of my points, although I'm not sure if you agree with me that the bombing campaign in Gaza has been counterproductive.
Well, I wanted to get into basically three things with you. The first one is the issue of Zionism in the perhaps the post-Gaza, the post-Hamas period in Gaza when that comes, and I do think that will come. The second one is the nature of the student protest, and the third is this business of this group of these sort of these they call themselves Torah Judaism that I'm following on TikTok, on not TikTok, on Twitter, and that they seem to be as pro-Palestinian as the Palestinians, even more so. The first point is that I think that Israel is neutralizing Gaza. Israel, it should be obvious at this point that Gaza is not going to be able to conduct itself as a sovereign entity, whatever that is. It's really been under the control of Arab powers and under control of its own power, particularly since Israel withdrew from Gaza in 1995 and has stripped all the Jews out of Gaza and handed it over to the Palestinian Authority. They immediately, I think, Israel's expectations when they did that was quite modest. They wanted a peaceful, quiet border, nothing more. They wanted the people of Israel to live near there without worrying about the sorts of things that actually did happen. And Gaza could have become like the French Riviera. I mean, this is not some piece of desert in the middle of nowhere. This is beachfront Mediterranean property. The city of Gaza itself is fairly well off. And they had money pouring in from all over the world, including from the U.S. taxpayer. They had every opportunity to develop the infrastructure of a sovereign Palestinian state. It's also should be remembered that at that time, Israel also handed over to the Palestinian Authority the area around Jericho and other areas in Judea and Samaria. But instead, they turned it into a launching pad against Israel itself. They ended up launching something like 6,000 missiles into Israel. They tried to ship heavy armaments, the Carine A, through the Mediterranean with the help of Iran. They began to, all of the money that was poured in, it seems, or at least most of it, was used to build this incredible network of terror. They started floating in
Okay,
gas
you're back.
balloons.
You froze for a second there.
I'm sorry. They started to float in gas balloons as a way to burn Israeli agriculture. And eventually and finally, and after continual ceasefires, which they never observed, they would just keep bombing and keep firing missiles into Israel in acts of aggression. And finally, you had the October 7th thing where they flew in on hang gliders with machine guns and tried to kill as many Israelis as possible. So my conclusion is that it's obvious to me that Gaza can never again be a sovereign Arab entity. It just won't happen. Even now, as Israel has defeated Hamas in the northern and central sectors, they're still making their way back there. They're still determined to destroy Israel. They still want a war of aggression. And in a war, you have to fight the war. And Israel has to, I think, annex the Gaza. Uh, Israelis should move into Gaza. And Palestinians who want to stay there should be able to stay there if they want to be peaceful. But if they're going to make war against Israel, they have to be destroyed and crushed completely. Um, Israel really has no choice. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. It could take years. It might even take decades. But Israel has to do the job of neutralizing that strip of territory along the beach. They really have no choice. Otherwise, they're not going to have, they'll just have perpetual war, and they'll have a perpetual border where you have people trying to break in and kill as many Israelis as possible. It's not a matter of whether they should do it. I think it's an issue of that they must do it. You can't have a hostile entity like that you can coexist with along a border. And they have proven to be a very hostile enemy. Israel, and by the way, I agree with you about the incompetence of the IDF. I mean, I think that's something that should be investigated. In my opinion, from what I've heard, and I have no idea, I have two sources on the inside in Israel, one military and one political, that the IDF in recent decades has been pretty heavily infiltrated by the same woke people that have infiltrated the American military, that they just are out of touch. They don't really understand the magnitude of what could happen. They're more worried about, whether or not people have the right bathrooms and that sort of thing. And that there were particularly some high-level IDF figures who decided to turn a blind eye. There was a group of Israeli soldiers on the border, women actually, who warned the brass that there was something brewing in Gaza and that they had to get up there and pay attention. And they were told to shut up. They were told they would be demoted. They were all killed on October 7th. So there
A
needs
few of
to
them are
be
still
Israel.
hospitalized.
Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I mean, a few of them survived and are
Okay.
currently being
So
held
some
as
of them might have
hostages.
survived. Some of them might be hostages. The Israel needs to have a full investigation of that. They need to probably have heads roll, and they need to get back into the business of defending the sovereign Israeli state and forget about the rest of this stuff. I mean, again, I'm speaking here in the comfort of Boston, so I have no idea, and I acknowledge that. But it just looks like there was some pretty major screw ups, and that the only reason that the so called flood, which originally had been patented by Soleimani, didn't go further was because you had Israeli boobies and Zaydis and retired military people take up their arms and rush over to that border to stop Hamas. And they did. It wasn't the IDF. The IDF did not do a good job here. They have a lot of egg on their face. It was Israeli men and women getting up and fighting. There was that famous incident where this grandfather and grandmother, the minute they heard about it, they picked up their arms. They had children, their sons and daughter-in-law and grandchildren living in a village near the border. And they came down there and they fired their way into that village and eliminated Hamas. And the little girl, they came out of hiding and she said, "Grandma's here, Grandpa's here." So you have incredible stories like that. And I think that as time goes on, we're going to hear more about that. And while Israeli society, I heard a lot of talk in the days after that about from people like E. Michael Jones and other enemies of Israel that, the Israelis are too busy sipping lattes and they don't have any coherence and they're going to fall apart. That's turned out to be untrue. That's one of the good elements that has emerged out of this, in that Israel has united, including people who don't like each other from all walks of life. And they have shown that they are a dynamic society, an organic society that knows how to come together in unity. They formed a unity government, and that they know how they have the resolve and they have the inner strength to defend themselves and to do whatever they have to do to preserve and protect the sovereignty of their own people and their own property. So there are some good things that have come out of this. I want to shift to this question of these Torah Judaism people. They take on the affectations of Eastern Europe. They've got the long beards and the black clothes, and they claim that they Israel is a evil, and that there should be no the state of Israel. I've had a back and forth with them, and they're very nasty and vile, and they throw obscenities at me for even criticizing them. Where I simply brought up the basic point, which is that if you take, the Torah that they claim to support and that they claim to be studying, every book of the Torah, every book of the writings, every book of the prophets, every book of the Talmud, every element of Jewish understanding has elements in it by which we are commanded by the King of the universe, the Creator, to take possession of that miserable little piece of land that we call Israel, the land between the river and the sea, the borders of which are very carefully delineated in the book of Deuteronomy, with right down from Dan to Beersheba, from the river to the sea, which is exactly where Israel is today. The only area of Israel that is not actually part of the biblical command by God is a stretch of land that goes south from Beersheba to Eilat, known as the Negev, or the desert. So, big deal. The point is that Israel is where God commanded that we take possession. So how can they call themselves Torah True Judaism if they're opposed to that? I mean, where does that come from?
Well, we've argued this in the past, and maybe just a quick differential, because I would consider myself a mainstream anti-Zionist. So like the Netori Karta, the Torah True Jews, the ones, there's actually only a few thousand of them. And, the people going to the protest, as opposed, and they're actually a break off from Satmar, and the most vehement are the Hungarians, and we discussed that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to all the way, the Holocaust and Katzner, and they look at Zionists as complicit in the Holocaust, and so that animosity is longstanding. However, like say the mainstream Haredi Hasidic anti-Zionist, and I would say probably half of Haredi Jews are anti-Zionist, although they're not cooperating with the opponents of Israel. So only the Netori Karta, only a few thousand, will actually collaborate with the military.
I thought that the Netori Karta were native Israeli. I mean, I thought weren't they in
There's different
Jerusalem
segments.
in the 18th century? Don't they go way back?
Yeah, there's different segments. I mean, there's also
Okay.
the Yerushalmis that predate Zionist and had collaboration with the Arabs under the Ottomans, and opposed. Opposition to Zionism was always the mainstream position of Haredi Judaism for theological reasons, or just reasons say that the secular state is illegitimate. So if you say from a religious perspective, well, yeah, maybe. So I would say like most Haredi anti-Zionists are not Palestinian human rights activists. They don't care about Palestinian human rights. And in fact, there's a pipeline from anti-Zionist to Zionist. I mean, the majority of Zionist extremists and even like the followers of Smodrick and Ben Gvir are former Haredim. And so it has nothing to do with
Right, and a
Palestinian.
lot of them, by the way, are now joining the IDF, and the IDF has done a lot of outreach to Orthodox Jews generally, but specifically to the
And even
Haredim.
those were the ones that the State Department had threatened to sanction because the human rights abuses of like the most notable human rights abuses were coming from these Haredi, and I'd even spoken to Palestinians that said like those are the worst in terms of like people in the West Bank mostly, but say but the case, the number of the Netori Karta, the protesters that team up with Palestinians, with that went to Iran, will meet with Hamas. There are actually very few of those people.
Yeah, they're
And
very vociferous, though, and they're very visible, and they show up.
Satmar even denounced them, and they're Netori Karta.
Okay, I understand that, but
Satmar denounced them.
my question to you, Dooovid, however, to get back to I want to be more precise. You tell me that they oppose Zionism on theological grounds. What theological grounds do they oppose Zionism?
Well, because if you mean Zionism as settlement of the land of Israel as opposed to the current Israeli government. So say like I would, as someone who went to Orthodox Haredi schools, um, almost half of black hat Orthodox Jews are neutral to anti-Zionist, and just saying the question is the current Israeli government is illegitimate, and if you're saying that,
According to them.
well, I'm saying that's according to, I would say, hundreds of thousands, even Netanyahu's coalition. I mean, even like the ministers of education, and we talked about this in the past. They refuse to stand up for Hatikva, and even the ones who participate in the system. So I say, of the Haredi anti-Zionists, most of them participate in the system and vote, and are part of Israel. They get tax benefits. The ones like there's a small segment that um, refuse Israeli governmental money. And like I was
Okay.
in Jerusalem, and there's probably less than 10,000 that actually reject the authority of the Israeli government and
So
kind of
they don't
live.
like the government. It's not that they're anti-Israel. They just don't happen to like the Likud government or
No,
you
the
know,
whole state of Israel. So saying that, like what you said about Zionism from the religious, they support the settlement of the land, but not the creation. And so there's multiple factors. One thing is
how
almost
do you
all of.
settle? How do you settle the land without creating a government? I mean, that's
Well, I
do,
mean,
they-
that's
do
a
they
different
think that?
argument. But we say when they're anti-Zionist,
Well, it's an argument I'd like to have them
well,
answer. I mean,
I'm just separating the ones that. So the ones that would like a return to Arab Palestinian rule are very small. The
okay.
ones that fundamentally reject the
I'm
state of
glad to
Israel.
know that because they're very vociferous, and you get people like Dr. Jones and others who are
Well, they're
like
like the
holding them up
Westboro
as good
Baptist Church.
Jews.
That's what they do professionally. They travel. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at like the one Rabbi Yisrael Dooovid Weiss, the spokesman, or Rabbi
Oh
Dovid,
yeah, I've heard him mentioned by name, and he's held up. He's held up by these
or I mean, you
anti-Israel
interviewed him. I
people.
mean, that
I interviewed him.
you mentioned you interviewed him. And
Oh, I interviewed somebody from there. Yeah, I don't know if it was him, but it was one of
he's
the
the most
worst
likely
interviews.
one but I was saying like he's on a plane, like he's traveling the world. He's on a plane every other day.
Yeah,
And even
yeah.
like these protesters, they're they're constantly traveling, going to these
So
protests.
it's a very fringe group. I mean, they certainly make themselves look bigger than they are. They show these videos of them. It looks like there's hundreds of them out there waving anti. They might as well be on Columbia. In fact, they are on Columbia,
Well, I mean, if you look
waving.
like 'cause when we first started streaming, I mentioned like Satmar. There's hundreds of Moskowitz in Satmar, and they're all anti-Zionist, but he's saying
You
they're on the side of the Jews, not on the side of the Arabs or the
And they blame
Palestinians.
Israel for the Holocaust.
Well, the Hungarians, yeah, I mean that's disputed
I
history.
mean, the Hungarian Jews. I mean, the Satmar family arrived in Palestine from a sealed car, thanks to the work of Kastner, who made a deal with Eichmann to have them
We don't
released.
have to go through this history. I mentioned that
No, we don't. But I mean, I
their
find it
claim is
to be
that
a
the
little
Zionists
ungrateful that they're going to
purposely
blame.
conspired to have because they didn't want them coming to Israel after the war, and they purposely conspired with the Nazis to have the Hungarian Hasidim killed, and that's their claim. You could argue with
Well,
it, but
they
like
maybe look
the
at it this
Satmar's
way.
vociferous hatred of Zionists, it's strong, but they still side with the Jews, not the Arabs. The ones of the Notori Karta, that they're like, no, I mean, we're on the side of the military opponents of Israel, not Israel, but saying the claim, looking at World War II and saying,
Mhm.
yes, the Zionists purposely conspired to have Hungarian Jews killed because they didn't want them to survive the war. And you could argue that it's a false claim, but I'm saying that's their
No,
claim.
I'm not sure that is a false claim. In that, if you look at the book Perfidy,
Yeah,
he
I'm gonna have
talks
that on my
about.
shelf.
Yeah, it's excellent,
Even
and he
Elie
talks.
Wiesel mentions that it might be possible. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
well,
Hungarian.
it possibly is only in that this guy Rudolf Kastner, who's a very mixed figure in Jewish history, he did make deals with Eichmann to release some Jews and
And he
others
was
not.
arrested and assassinated. I mean, saying, yeah,
He
I'm
was
saying, that, okay, the
assassinated
Satmar
in
Rebbe
the
was
60s
saved.
in Tel Aviv,
The
and
Satmar Rebbe was saved. A few thousand Jews were saved, but that was because
But that's because he sold out
they
other
bribed the Nazis
Hungarian
and they
Jews.
sold out
I
the
think
hundreds
that's
of
very
thousands.
possible. I'm not sure that he was operating in his capacity as representing the Ben Gurion's
But I'm
government
saying
in
from that
waiting.
perspective, you're saying if you're talking religiously, like yes, you're like the land of Israel, settling the land of Israel, but saying the Jews who created the state of Israel, these are despicable, evil people, and we want nothing to do with them. We completely reject the state that they formed. So you're in like the IDF in these
Yeah,
rulings. So if you
so
look
they're
at
gonna
mainstream
risk the
Canadian,
7 million Jews of Israel to a Holocaust because they reject the present government. Let
government.
me just
They're saying, well,
let
if
me
you're
just
talking
say this.
Haredi anti-Zionism, where you're not, they still side with the state of Israel over
Okay,
Palestine, but
thank
they
you. I'm glad to know
fundamentally
that. I mean, let,
reject the current state of Israel as
okay.
illegitimate,
Before
although
we
they
go on to,
participate in it
yeah,
and they actually have ruling power. Saying they're even.
I
I mean, this
understand
would
that.
be
And
the official
before we
position.
go on to that, I just want to comment on that. First of all, the business of the Satmar family with Rudolf Kastner. Rudolf Kastner was operating, I think, according to the book Perfidy and according to others, as kind of a rogue figure. He wasn't representing Ben Gurion when he sold out Hungarian Jews, and he probably very likely did for reasons that who knows. I mean, it was not, obviously not in the interest of the of Palestine, Jewish Palestine, to do that, and that there were a lot of very heroic Palestinian Jews, including Hannah Sarans, who actually flew rescue missions into Hungary to try to rescue Jews. So you did have this one bad guy there making deals with Eichmann, and he did rescue some Jews, but he probably, for whatever reason, sold out a lot more.
Well, you're
But
going to put him
the
as a lone
basic,
rogue actor as opposed to the agent of the mainstream Zionist position.
yeah, well, no, I don't think that there's no evidence that he was, and I doubt if
I'm
he
just
was.
saying that
Why?
you just think he was a lone rogue actor that
Yes. Why would the mainstream Zionists want to sell out Hungarian Jews? I mean, they had no reason for that. They
because
wanted to bring them into
none of them
Palestine.
wanted the Hungarian Hasidim to come to Israel.
Well,
They
first of all, the
didn't
Hungarian
want to save
Jews.
those. That from their perspective, they saw what was going to
Okay,
happen, and
but most of the
they thought
Hungarian
it'd be
Jews are
better
not
that those
Hasidic.
people die in the camps than end up in Israel.
Most of the Hungarian Jews were not Hasidic any more than most of any group of Jews are Hasidic. We're talking here about a small sect. Most of them, the hundreds of thousands of Jews of Hungary, who really were sent off to the camps at the very end of the war, because the Nazis didn't occupy Hungary until the summer of 1944, and they were already losing.
It was only it's about
The
God forbid
vast
only
majority of them were
400,000.
not Hasidic Jews. They were secular Jews who went off to the camp. But I want to just, before we move on to the next thing, their
I'm just
opposition
clarifying
to.
the difference between mainstream anti-Zionism and
Okay,
saying
thank
like
you.
yes, like Jews, Israel is the land of the Jews. However, the current Israeli government from its founding is illegitimate. However,
From their perspective.
we will work within the system besides for certain thresholds like serving in the military.
And I want to talk about that from a theological standpoint, in that I get the sense that this anti-Zionist group, they're purists. They want to see.
You're talking about the ones protesting or the mainstream
I'm talking
anti-Zionist
about
position
both.
that
Yeah,
represents
this is
hundreds
who
of
I'm talking
thousands.
about. I'm talking about those protesting and also those who are ambivalent toward the existence of the modern
Well, a lot of those
third.
people also have been beat up by the IDF. So I mean,
Fine. I'm
there's bad
talking
blood.
about all of them, Dooovid. The people who are
Basically, they're
opposed.
opportunists. They're making
Yeah,
money off
they
of
don't
it.
like the fact that, look, my great grandmother rejected Judaism because her husband died on Shabbos, and she blamed, so you always have Jews who reject Judaism. The point I'm making here is this. The people who are ambivalent toward the Third Temple Commonwealth, which is what Israel is, that they they're missing a very basic point here. If they believe that the government is too secular, it's not Torah true enough, they might take a look, first of all, not only at history, but also at the Torah, in that the entire struggle of the Jewish people, going all the way back to when Joshua crossed the Jericho and to feed and crossed the Jordan, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, and the era of the judges, the era of the kings, the era of David and Solomon, and the division of the kingdom into Israel and Judah, the first Commonwealth, Israel has always struggled with trying to both be holier and falling away from holiness, and that the job of the prophets and the judges and the righteous Jews of every generation has been to stay there and to preach and to try to bring their fellow Israelis toward God and toward understanding their role in the world and in the universe, not stabbing them in the back. Same thing is true with the Second Commonwealth. After Ezra, you had the civil war that led to the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty between the Hellenized Jews and the Maccabees, or the Hasmoneans, who became the Pharisees. They were the religious Jews. They were acting like the prophets did in the time of old. Bring the people back. They weren't purists. They recognized that they were existing in a human society that needed to find its way and find its mission.
Well, I mean, that's the mainstream.
Jesus of Nazareth, that was his mission.
Yeah, but you're just arguing the mainstream.
Wait a minute. He came to fulfill the Torah by bringing the people of Roman-occupied Judea back to an understanding of God. So here you have these people, their job in Israel, if they really wanted to be true to the Torah, and I'm sorry to have to just preach to them, that's something that I'm comfortable doing, is to try to bring Israel to become more holy, to try to bring Israel closer to knowing God by their example, by their attempts to be loving and charitable and to teach, not to try to welcome in Ahmadinejad, not to try to go to rallies and support Arafat or whatever the enemies are of Israel because they're not perfect. This isn't, they're like the communists. It's not going to be perfect. They have to try to make it better, not try to destroy it. It doesn't make sense I'm talking from a theological standpoint, let alone a political one.
Well, I'm just differentiating. If you're arguing against the extremist position as opposed to the mainstream anti-Zionist position who work within the system.
I'm arguing against the whole anti-Zionist position. Why are they they should be trying to improve. If they feel that Israel is not...
these people are wicked, evil people, and just because they're Jews...
I don't think I think that
I was in I lived in Hasidic communities and saying, Borough Park had more Holocaust survivors than anywhere in the world at the time. And saying, if you say their position, why it would reduce to a yelling match, and saying no, these people are wicked, evil people.
Well, then they need to preach to them. Are they going to destroy the whole society over them? And what does that make them? Doesn't that make them wicked? They need to preach to them and try to tell people to get closer to God, not destroy a 7 million...
You're saying these people belong in prison. You're saying if you're talking...
No, I don't say that. I say they're misguided.
You're talking if you're looking Ben Gurion, the leaders of Israel, the military leaders, even the current ones, they shouldn't be preached to. They should be in prison.
Well, that's so they want to destroy Israel because people aren't going to be perfect according to their...
So the mainstream Haredi anti-Zionists, because they don't want to destroy Israel. They want to take over.
But they don't recognize...
They want to take over Israel. They want to inherit Israel.
Fine.
So it's only the extreme position that wants to return to non-Jewish rule. So the ones protesting, they would return and live under Arab rulership. So the mainstream anti-Zionist position is that Israel has a lot of problems, but they don't want to dissolve Israel. They just eventually want to inherit and rule Israel.
All right, well, that's fine. That's a legitimate political position.
That is the mainstream position. That's the people who...
I don't agree. I don't agree with that, but at the same time, I respect the fact that, if they reach a majority and they elect a government, then maybe they will inherit Israel. I hope they don't, but I think that at least they're loyal to the mission of the Third Temple Commonwealth of Israel. The Jewish state. The other ones, I think they're worse. They're bad. They have a right to their opinions as long as they don't start to actively...
Why don't we say they're only bad in the sense of a mice. I'm saying, well, what even like what did they do bad? Like they're just protesting.
They're aiding and abetting the enemies of Israel who are
I'm
trying
saying
to
they're
destroy it.
traitors, but they didn't really
That's
do
pretty
anything
bad.
bad.
Look,
If you're
Dooovid,
saying like, and we talked about in the past, like the mice or the traitor could be considered the most serious of sins. If you're talking for that level, but like, I mean, the Tory Carta, they're not necessarily bad people. You say
no,
they're
but
traitors,
if they
and
are
the
aiding and
traitors,
abetting
of
the
course.
enemy of Israel in a wartime and they're endangering their own people to the point that this, that's beyond misguided. That's deranged. I mean, that's wrong, and it's worthy of condemnation. Now, I'm not calling for them to be imprisoned. I mean, unless I don't think they quite crossed the line, and they may be actively aiding and abetting an enemy.
Let me agree,
But
they're
they're not.
traitors. But I mean, if your enemy's enemy is your friend, and Israel is their enemy, that makes Hamas and Iran their friend, and
Yeah, in
anti-Semites
which
their
case
friend.
they're no different than Hamas, and they should probably, if they're going to get that
No,
active, they
these
should be
people aren't
treated like
like
Hamas.
they're not doing terrorist activity. They're not
Well,
military.
that's what I'm saying. I don't think
Most
they
of them are
crossed that line.
pacifist. Almost all of these people are pacifist. But I mean, in a sense, like yes, they consider Israel their enemy so much that they do actively team up with even military. Saying like
Okay,
they would meet with the leaders of Hamas in Iran.
and
They would
they
they
lend
would even
aid and
support
support
their
to
victory
the
over Israel.
enemies of the Jewish people, and that makes them enemies. But they're not, if they're not actively engaging in terrorism against their fellow Jews, then maybe they deserve it. Well, they don't deserve, but they should be granted at least the right to function. But what I'm only bringing up, and I want to move on to another subject, is that they are, and I've made my case, I'll leave it at what it is. They are theologically very, very misguided if they're seeking a perfect Jewish state. It's never existed because mankind is not perfect. Only God is perfect. And the fact that they would make those kind of demands on Israel rather than approach it as prophets shows that they have completely gone off the deep end in terms of what it actually means to be a Jew. Now, I want to go on to the talk about Gaza, go back to that, Dooovid. Um, what, I mean,
We could be in agreement that besides that, say like, okay, like I think this war is going to lead to the end of Israel, which from my position, I would, my position is we should grant full citizenship to all the Arabs, and that would basically be the end of Zionism. And I think we've put ourselves in a situation
I
where
don't think so. I agree with you, by the way. I do think we should give them full citizenship.
where
However,
basically it's either ethnic cleansing or
no,
giving them
I'm
full
not for that.
citizenship.
Look, I mean, I interviewed, I don't know if
But
you've
you would
ever
still
heard.
try to play yourself as a Zionist. I'd say I'm
No, I
anti-Zionist
think it's
because I
consistent
support
with
giving them.
Zionism.
Well,
So did,
that's
did
what I'm
you,
arguing. I say if you're saying we're just playing with words, then because I call myself anti-Zionist because I support one state giving full citizenship, secular democracy.
no, I
We don't
don't,
need
nothing
a
with
Jewish state.
secular.
We just need a safe state.
David, did you hear my interviews with David Rubin, the mayor of Shiloh?
Well, years ago or recently?
Well, I probably years ago. I haven't talked to him recently.
Yeah, I mean that was before we even started streaming.
Yeah. Anyways, I tend to think that he presents a very interesting thesis in that he says that the Arabs of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza should be granted citizenship in Israel, but obviously this was somewhat modified by former Trump ambassador David Friedman. I heard him on an interview where he talked about this as well, that they should be granted citizenship, they should be granted free access. However, there is a process by which they should obtain citizenship. Even this country has a process by which an American citizen has, they have to take a test, they have to swear a loyalty oath to the American flag, and they have to mean it. Because if they take that test and they take that oath, and then it turns out that they're subversive to the American system, in other words, that they lied and they betrayed the oath that they took, then they can be expelled. And I think as far as the Palestinian Arabs go, if they're willing to undergo a period of education, a full year of training in terms of what Israel's mission is in the world, that Israel is a Jewish state, that the prime minister of Israel and the president of Israel has to be a Jew, in the same way that the queen, the king of England, has to be Anglican, by the way, and the Prime Minister of England has to be Anglican by law. That Israel is a Jewish state, and they understand all of that, and they are then willing to take a loyalty oath to Israel, one that they will be charged with if they violate. Then they should become citizens of Israel, just like Israeli Arabs are citizens of Israel. They would then be able to function within Israel and have a relatively high level of rights. I think that there are some constrictions that would have to be put in there, as there are for Israeli Arabs. Like they may not be able to serve in the IDF. Maybe there could be some kind of an alternative national service, because that they should get the benefits of that kind of service without actually being in the army, because otherwise they might have to fight against their own families if there's a war with Syria or with an Arab country. Plus, they might be more inclined to be subversive. And that they also should understand that while they can elect a Knesset member, the president of Israel has to be a Jew and the prime minister has to be a Jew, and because it's a Jewish state. I think once those things are established, they should become citizens. Now, the ones who don't want citizenship or who continue to fight a war against Israel, they should be killed or they should be expelled. And I think at the end of the day,
you're talking years back when you spoke to but now you were talking like the West Bank, but now you're talking about the 2 million people in Gaza also.
Yes, Gaza and Judea and Samaria. Yeah,
I mean, Gaza, from a mainstream Israeli position, even with your provisions, because I would even be willing to sacrifice the Jewish character and just have a secular liberal
sacrifice the Jewish character.
You wouldn't call yourself an anti-Zionist, but your position almost puts you into an because that would be the dissolution of Israel.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is that
have a demographic majority.
No, they would have demographic majority. The anti-Zionist has no faith in Zionism and in the Jewish people. Israel, first of all,
you don't need a Jewish state.
No, it isn't. It would be a Jewish state.
I think the problem is the Jewish state. And that's why I say, like, I'm anti-Zionist. I think
no. If they have a problem with the Jewish state, then they should be encouraged to leave. The point is, if they're willing to be loyal to the Jewish state, then they can stay. Now, my suspicion is that probably a good percentage of them are going to leave if they can, and they should be helped in that regard. Now,
your position's been somewhat the case for decades in saying, so unless you're actively going to do an ethnic cleansing, you're going to have the status quo position where it's like, okay, well, like, you guys aren't meeting our demands to be put into what we want as, if you like apartheid or however classify your system, where you're a non-Jewish resident of a Jewish state, and that's why you have Gaza. That's why you have the issue. So now we've reached the brink.
No, but I think that Gaza and Judea and Samaria should be absorbed by Israel. I don't think it should be separate. And
absorbed by giving them full citizenship. So you're not saying you're going to absorb them by giving them partial citizenship.
Right. Not almost
or expel them, and even like without arguing full citizenship versus partial citizenship, and the question, well, what about the people who don't accept that, and they should be what? So that's why you have Gaza. The people who didn't accept
it. If they don't accept it, if they don't accept it, but they're willing to be peaceful and not be subversive, then they could be left where they are. I mean, I don't think that that's a problem. As long as they don't, if they start to pick up arms against Israel, then they should be met on the battlefield, just like anyone else. I mean,
that's a scenario. So either you have the continuation of Gaza. So it's like either. So that goes back to my first point that like the war in the last 6 months has not helped Israel one bit. So either like after October 7th, they could have just fought back, regained the territory, and put the wall back up.
No, they should take the wall down, and they should annex.
If after this war, all that happens is they put the wall back up, and the war didn't accomplish anything,
nothing will have been gained. I agree with that. That's
where we're headed. That's kind of what you're saying. So
no, it's not. I'm saying take the wall down, annex Gaza, help Israeli settlers move into Gaza, help them
ethnically cleanse. 1.5 million people
No, they don't have to ethnically
refuse
cleanse
your
them.
partial citizenship.
They have to accept the fact that they if they're willing to live peacefully alongside Israel as
But what if they're
Israelis,
not? So I'm saying the point.
then they should be ethnically cleansed.
So
Yes, if they're
you're
not.
taking even a more extreme position. You're saying like we're not going to put the wall back up. We're going to give it all or nothing. Either take partial citizenship or be ethnically cleansed
Yes, that is my
or
position.
genocided.
No genocide.
So I mean,
They can find homes for them. They can move to Los Angeles. I don't know, but the point is that
well, no,
no.
You're saying Israel does not have the capability to find homes for them. They either
Yes,
Israel
they
has
do.
Israel has two options. They go to war with Egypt to take over the Rafah crossing and force them into the Sinai Peninsula. And then
No,
once they're
no, I'm
there,
not
that's
saying
their
that.
problem. But I mean, Israel does not have the ability to resettle them.
I don't think it could. Look, it's not going to happen overnight. But if they're willing to, if
When you're
people are
talking about
willing,
international, but I mean, just making the point that Israel could unilaterally give them full citizenship and
after a period of training, and if
well,
they
I'm
want
not saying
to,
your solution, but I'm saying without like an international community, Israel could do, God forbid, three things basically. Either they could, four things. Either they maintain the status quo and just put the wall back up, or they absorb the Palestinians and give them partial or full citizenship, or they kill them,
right?
or they they some minor form of declaration of war with Egypt to take over the Rafah crossing and force them into the Sinai Peninsula. Other
I'm
than that, you're talking about
of
what
those
the international community
of
should do.
those four
So
things you just.
Israel can't control what happened. All Israel could do is either kill or force them into the Sinai Peninsula. They can't
No,
control. That's the
yes, they
part of the
can.
international
What
community.
I'm saying, Dooovid,
I mean, you're
is
talking the international community. That's the differentiating.
no. I'm talking about of the four things that you just mentioned. I am talking about two of them. The first one is to take down the wall and absorb Gaza, welcome Israelis to move into back home to where they were, set up communities. The military needs to set up bases there to keep an eye on things.
They
And
would
that if, and
ethnically cleanse first.
wait a minute, and if the Palestinian Arabs of Gaza want to accept a form of citizenship, that should be offered under conditions. Or if they don't, but they want to be peaceful, then they could be left alone. Now, if they want to continue to engage in acts of war, they should be taken out, just like anywhere else. I mean, if we had gangs in this country fighting, trying to kill Americans, we would expect them to be stopped by any means necessary. So, if and also they should be encouraged to find homes elsewhere and aided in that way, but not necessarily in a complete ethnically cleansed way where you have hundreds of thousands being kicked out. Just it would have to happen over time. It would have to happen in that. I would imagine that once Hamas is taken out and Israel moves in, you're going to probably have many hundreds of thousands of Gazans who want to get out of there. They should be helped. Israel should offer assistance to help them settle in other countries, maybe offer financial help, to other countries and to them to get that done. It doesn't have to be done immediately. We could be done over the next, many, many decades. But the point is that at the end of the day, and these things are not perfect solutions, and they're not things that happen overnight. You can't just turn it on a dime. Israel cannot have a foreign entity in that region. It doesn't work for the Israelis. So the only solution is to annex that strip and to then offer a combination of citizenship or ethnic cleansing. If you must, I don't think it really has anything to do with their ethnicity. It has to do with their political position. It's not. It's more of a cultural cleansing, I suppose. In that, if you have people who are opposed to the state of Israel and actively so, like any sane sovereign nation, Israel has a right to stop that. I mean, otherwise they're going to end up being killed themselves. So that's my position.
I mean, there's a lot of technical problems, and that's you know that the unlikeliness that I mean the first when after October 7th happened, and Israel was supposedly going to do a ground invasion, and I was following the international military experts on what the ground invasion would look like, and relatively Israel never did the ground invasion, and so Israel would have to sacrifice tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers. I mean, because right now, like Israel can't even move back next to Gaza. Not alone like to create a settlement in Gaza. The people right next to Gaza haven't even moved back, and they're still evacuating people. Uh, but and Hamas, although maybe they've taken severe hits, they're still there, and to actually
Well, it could take many years, Dooovid. I mean, look, they have to destroy the
well,
tunnels.
yeah, but saying that to do that would cost the life of tens of thousands of Israeli
Well,
soldiers.
they don't have to do it that way. They could do it in a way that
The military
minimum.
experts disagree. Like eventually, you have to send troops into the tunnels, and so
No, they've destroyed a lot of the tunnels. They can continue to
it's
use
unclear whether
technology.
they have. I mean, they're dropping bombs above the tunnels, but it's unclear whether they've even
No,
destroyed.
they've already destroyed a lot of them. There's a lot more to go. It's probably going to take another 10 years before they completely
I mean, there's
destroy
still
that tunnel
three hundred
infrastructure.
thousand people in northern Gaza. So with the humanitarian aid, the siege, um, but the humanitarian aid, like Hamas gets it. They're in the tunnels. There's going to residually be resistance.
Well, what?
Probably
How
forever,
many of the?
unless Israel actually was willing to sacrifice tens of thousands of
No, I
troops
don't think
to
they
have
have
Hamas.
to. And I look,
Well, I mean,
David,
that's your fantasy, though.
my source of
That's your
information.
fantasy. So
No, I
if
don't.
you
It's not
accepted the
fantasy.
military reality
My source
that
of information is these, and again, obviously, it has some bias.
the incompetent IDF.
Is the IDF has finally is has reacted by pulling itself together now, and
6 months.
they
Israel claimed that Netanyahu, they were claiming that the war was going to be over by the end of December, and
no,
then
they
January.
said that it's going to take a year. Now, David, my source on
I mean,
this,
earlier that Israel said that they claimed that they were going to
at
have
first they
complete
said that.
control of northern
Now they're
Gaza
saying it's going to
by
take a year.
January.
I think it's probably going to take another, probably between 15 and 20 years to finish it, and that's fine. But the
Well, it's
point
going to
I'm
be a
making
forever war.
here,
They're not going to finish
my
it.
source is the IDF's, and again, I have two people I know in Israel, but I mean, my general source is the IDF's page on Twitter that they post articles. And what they're showing and have been showing over the past 6 months is that they're able to locate both the tunnels and the rocket launchers. And they use a coordination of Air Force, Navy, and military using missiles to destroy those edifices. Now, it's I don't know how much
I
they've
mean,
done.
you're just saying
Wait a minute.
I-
Wait a minute.
you're saying you don't
Wait
know
a
what you're
minute.
talking about.
Wait a minute. I don't know how much that they have actually, what percentage of the terror tunnels they've actually destroyed. And, I think it's going to take a long time. We're talking about an infrastructure that, I mean, I don't know how the Israelis allowed this to happen right under their noses, anyways, but that's history.
I've
The
been
point is that now
spending
they
2
have a
hours a day.
situation. Now they have a situation where it could take many years for them to continue to locate these tunnels. I think Israel has the technology to do that. They have the weaponry to do it. They've got the ammunition. They're not even using their best weapons for some reason. They should. And they can just gradually, one by one, take out each individual tunnel. Now, Israel's approach always has been, by the way, going all the way back to really before 1948. It goes back to the Passover, bloody Passover of 1920, when the Haganah formed in response, is not to engage in a massive war which puts Israeli military people at risk, but to very carefully and very strategically identify and isolate the enemy and take that enemy out, the person or the people who are killing Israelis. And it could take 1,000 years to really do it. But the point is that that is the right policy. I don't think that they need to go in en masse and risk the lives of Israeli boys and girls. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have many relatives. Their children are there now, and these are young people. I don't want to see them put at risk. They have to do it in a way that is not going to result in this great parade, like at the end of World War II when you had Times Square and the soldier kisses the girl and everybody's hooray, and they're all, no, that's not what Israel's looking at. They're looking at a difficult slow and painstaking and painful destruction of this enemy. So I think it can be done without that kind of loss of Jewish life
Yeah, but
and
unfortunately, you're
and
incorrect.
Arab life, I may
Yeah, man,
add.
but unfortunately, like, I mean, I was just mentioning because, like, you just mentioned, like, well, you don't really know what you're talking about, and like, you're just going off a Twitter page.
Neither do you.
Well, no, 'cause I spend 2 hours a day, and I'm talking the
You still
actual
don't know what
Israeli.
you're talking about.
Well, no, I mean, this was the actual Israeli plan on October 21st or whatever when they started.
And they abandoned that when they realized they couldn't do it.
No, they could have. The original
No,
plan,
I don't think so.
the estimate that this was the IDF estimate. They called up they had 3,000 troops outside of northern Gaza, and the IDF themselves estimated that they were going to lose 10,000 soldiers doing the ground campaign. They never sent in more than a few thousand people. They didn't take Gaza,
Yeah,
but
because they
this
didn't
was
want
the
to lose
original.
10,000 soldiers.
Just pay attention a second. The original IDF plan estimated that they were going to lose 10,000 soldiers to take just northern Gaza.
Yeah,
And
but they didn't do that, Dooovid,
yeah, but that
for
was the
that
IDF's
reason.
own estimate that
Well, what's the point? They
but
didn't do it because they didn't want to
you
lose that
can't
many
take
soldiers.
northern Gaza and destroy Hamas without the loss of
No,
thousands and
look, Dooovid,
thousands of
you and I,
IDF
neither
soldiers.
you
That's
or
still the
I,
IDF's position.
yeah, but look, Dooovid, neither you or I are military experts. I did
This
not
is what
serve in the
this is what
Dooovid.
the
You
IDF's own
didn't serve,
military
and
experts
I
said.
didn't serve. Yeah, and obviously they've had to adjust that because they want to preserve their lives of their soldiers. But the point is, in the
Yeah,
bigger
but you can't have it
picture,
both ways. It's like
yes, they
Normandy.
can. They're
You
going
like
to do it
you're saying
another
you could
way,
defeat
but they're
Gaza,
going to get it
you could
done,
defeat
Dooovid.
Gaza and Hamas without a Normandy,
No,
and you say like, no,
you're
there
in
has
no
to be a
position to
Normandy.
say that. They've obviously changed their mind because they want to save the lives of the men and women in uniform. And so they'll find another way, and they are finding another way. It's just
No,
a
they aren't.
little
That's why it's
slower.
6 months and they haven't accomplished anything.
They have accomplished a lot. And they will continue. I look at it daily. They are taking them out. It's just taking a lot
No, they are. I
longer.
mean, if you look at it daily, Hamas has retaken back Gaza City, northern
They have
Gaza.
not retaken Gaza City. There's a couple of terrorists who have returned, and Israel's finding them.
No,
And it might take
Israel
another.
does not control. Israel has a few areas they created a buffer zone, but Israel does not control northern
Well, you
Gaza
know
after six
something
months.
of it. It's going, as I say, and you and I are going to get off the merry-go-round here and go on to another subject. I
You just
believe
have
that
like some fantasy about what that's
not a fantasy. I believe that the IDF and the Israeli government and the Israeli society understands that it's going to be a very long, very slow haul, but that at the end of the day, even if it takes 1,000 years, they will destroy this enemy. And they will do it in a way that is minimal loss of
that's
not
what
only Jewish life, but Arab life.
that's what the
That is
politicians are
what
saying.
they've always
The
done.
IDF's position
And
still the same.
they've never had a victory. Look, I want to mention, by the way, to kind of move on here, because that's what I believe will happen. Israel made a big mistake, and I don't know if there was anything that could have been done otherwise, when they did not completely liberate Palestine in 1948, when they did not take the mountains of the ancient lands of Judea and Samaria back when they probably could have. And the reason they didn't, I think, looking at it in general, was because they were also, putting aside there was a ghetto mentality that has been in the Jewish soul for 2,000 years. I mean, Dr. Michael Jones writes about this in his book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, in that the Jews were allowed to live in Europe and survive if they accepted second-class citizen status, what's called in Latin Judeo non, sicut Judeo non. And so they always were sort of having to appease, having to accommodate the Christian society in order to live. And they had to. I get that. That's how they lived. That's how they survived. But the problem is that they carried that same mentality to Israel in a place where they were reestablishing their commonwealth. And it hurt them. It hurt them, along with the fact that the Haganah, in the middle of that war, rather than really winning the war, they turned their guns on the more militant Israelis, the Zvei Leumi, and the Stern Gang and the Begin's group, when in fact they should have come together and done the job and basically left behind that ghetto mentality that we still have and really asserted the sovereignty and their mission. They sold out their mission when they gave up that land. They sold out the whole raison d'etre rather than stick to a little ghetto state that exists along the beach with a thin neck. They needed to reestablish the Jewish Commonwealth. They either do it or not do it. And the point is that once they resolved to do it, they should have finished the job. And I think that even though mistakes have been made in terms of appeasing this enemy, which seeks to destroy Israel, and internationally appeasing this internationalist establishment, this liberal establishment, they can still do it, and they have to do it, because that's the mission that God set forth for the Jewish people when he told Abraham to go to that land that he would show him. Now, why God chose that miserable piece of land, I have no idea. You don't know either. That's a mystery. But the fact is that it's in the Torah, and that the Torah, either we believe it's true or we don't. And as such, they need to fulfill their mission of taking possession of that land and stop pussyfooting around. Get it done.
Or sacrifice the tens of thousands of people necessary to do it.
No, it
So
can
you're
be
saying
done.
like you got to do it, but nobody gets to be killed. When even the Israeli military experts said they could have taken Gaza in 2
It's going to
months
be a lot.
plus 10,000 troops.
Look, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
But you're the one that's not taking your own advice. If you want to do it, you have to be willing to lose thousands and thousands of Israeli soldiers. We're going to do it, but no one's going to die.
It's going to be a lot more. Well, a lot of people are going to die if they don't do it. Like as in the whole country's going to die. The point I'm making.
That's what Trump is saying. Like you got to get the job done.
As always,
and you can't get the job
done. The point
done
is that because they didn't do it in 1948, when they could have done it in a way that didn't have that kind of loss of life.
There's no such
they've
thing
waited 50 years to do it now, when it is going to cost possibly some more loss of life.
Not some more.
Nevertheless, they have to do it now, because if they don't do it, then they're all going to have a loss.
I'm willing to whip out and give up on
6
Israel.
6 million Israelis are going to have a loss of life
on the ground
unless they reassert their sovereignty over their land. And I'm not
suggesting you're not willing to die for it.
To be easy.
You can't win the land.
I didn't say it was going to be easy. I'm saying that either they're going to have to, some of them are going to have to die, reasserting their sovereignty from the river to the sea, or they are all going to die, because they cannot survive unless they reassert not only their God-given mandate to take possession of that tiny land, but also in a national sense, their practical mandate to take possession. Now, I'm going to just end this segment by mentioning a parallel.
The original plan.
I have heard, for example, Dr. E. Michael Jones talk about the the Crusades and what happened with that. Israel could have learned and should have learned a very valuable lesson from the Crusades, which was a Catholic Zionist movement, the Franks, basically conquering that land from the Turkish authorities or whoever was in control of it at the time. And that is that when they established the Kingdom of Jerusalem under the Franks in 1099, you had a group of Christians who decided that they wanted to go out and have a picnic along the banks of the Jordan River. And so they went out there, and the Saracens, as the Christians called the Arabs back then, they were slaughtered, except 1 or 2 of them escaped, and they went back to Jerusalem to talk about what happened. Now, what did the Christian kingdom do in response to that? Rather than go out and fight the Saracens, which a lot of people would have died, a lot of Christians would have died, instead, they built walls, and they went behind the walls, and they hid, and they cowered in fear. And the result ultimately was that the Christian Zionist kingdom shrank and eventually was destroyed, and they all lost their lives. So it's a kind of a situation where you have to size up the nature of this enemy, which is an enemy not only of the Jewish people, but it's an enemy of God and it's an enemy of the Torah. It's an enemy of the Quran, by the way, which calls for the establishment of a Jewish state. And you have to say, we're going to assert our national and our religious mission. I don't like the term that Israel has a right to exist because I don't think anyone has a right. Israel has earned its existence by,
Right?
by,
They got to
by
be
the
willing to die
sacrifice
for it. They
of its
demonstrate
own
they are.
people and by the creation of a very vibrant, dynamic, organic society
It's the
that is
opposite.
very highly moral in many ways.
No, but
But
Israel's
in
demonstrated it
order
does not
to
have the right
see
to
a
exist.
future of that society and in order to go on, they have to assert their sovereignty over that tiny land. They have to stop this crazy conversation, which is obviously emanates from not only a ghetto mentality on the part of the Jews, but an
I mean, you're just making me
international
more and more
agenda
upset because
that is the same agenda that led to the Nazi Holocaust. They have to reject that agenda and do their mission, as I said, which is to
yeah, but
assert
the problem is
their
they're wimps and
sovereignty
cowards.
in the region between the Jordan River and the sea.
I mean, you bring out like the Ben Gvir me because like the problem is that Israel's a bunch of wimps and cowards. Like only 300 people have died in 6 months. They wimped out. They had the plan, and you're still like Charles. You're a wimp. You're saying like no. Israel's proved they do not have the right to exist because they're not willing to sacrifice their
I
own
just said
life.
no one has a right to exist. People
And
have
you
to
talk like the
assert.
Civil War, any of these wars, like Israel's gonna, has the right to exist because they're willing to sacrifice 300 people's lives.
Is that how many Jews died in this war?
From October 7th on, only 300 soldiers have died in
Only?
Gaza.
That's a lot of soldiers.
No, it's nothing. That's because the original IDF plan that would have been over in January called for the likely death of 10,000 Israeli soldiers. But people like you wimped out. And you prove that you do not have the right to Israel because you're not willing, you don't want sovereignty, you're not willing to do what's necessary for it, just like Ukraine. Ukraine, like some days 1,000 people are dying every day in Ukraine, and Israel has demonstrated that they do not care about the land enough to sacrifice their own lives.
Look I would argue, you could make that argument. I would argue that Israel
That's
is
the Ben
going
Gvir argument, although those people aren't really the ones fight. That's the IDF argument. Like, this isn't my argument. This was what the IDF said originally.
right.
This was their
And they
original plan. We're going
obviously,
to take northern
I
Gaza. We're going to put boots on the ground. And it's 6 months later, Israel has still not put boots on the ground. They're still dropping bombs.
fine. And maybe they'll
So
just
you
have to
think you could win a
continue.
war with technology and dropping bombs without boots on the ground?
Dovid, you and I mean, look, they did say this. You and I are, neither of us are military experts. They obviously changed their strategy because they wanted to save Jewish lives. And I have to trust that
And that's why
judgment
6 months later, the
with
war is
the
still
ultimate
going.
understanding that they're going to get the job done at the end of the day. If you keep
You're
dropping
not paying
bombs,
attention to
eventually
IDF
the
said.
whole region is going to
This
turn
is the
into
IDF's
wax.
own statement that this was the idea. You
Fine,
have to
and they
put
change.
boots on the
This is
ground.
the
You have to
fifth time,
send people into
David.
the
This is the
tunnels.
fifth time we've gone over this. They obviously changed their mind because they did not want to lose Jewish life.
They wimped
We'll
out.
go over. Do
They
you want to
wimped
go over
out.
it again? We'll
What
say
do
it
we say?
again.
They changed their
They
mind. They wimped
obviously
out.
changed their
And if they
mind
were going to wimp out,
because
they
they did
shouldn't have
not
done. They shouldn't
want
have
to
went in at
lose
all. That's
Jewish
why we're
life.
in the disaster
And
situation.
so
This is what Trump
therefore,
is
they're going to
saying.
move
Well,
forward
do you agree with
more
what Trump is
gradually,
saying?
more carefully, and maybe it may take more years, but they're going to win in the end because
No,
they have
this
no
is
other
what Trump.
choice.
This is what President Trump is saying. He's speaking directly to you. He's on your side, but you can't win being a wimp. Get it done. You want to do it, get it done. But you're a wimp and a coward. You're not going to
Fine.
get it done. You're not going to win in
In
the
the
end
name
being
of
a wimp and a
saving
coward.
Israeli lives in the short term, I'll accept that moniker because I do believe that
But
Israel
that's what
can.
President
The
Trump is saying. You're not
Israelis are,
getting it
I
done.
don't
You're
give a
not going to
damn
win
what
in the end.
someone else said. The Israelis are
What did President
intelligent
Trump mean when he
enough.
said that? You're still back. What did President Trump say?
I don't know
Netanyahu,
what
you're not
Trump meant
getting
when
it
he
done.
said that. Who the
Get
hell
it
does
done.
Trump know about this? The point is that
What
Israel,
you're backing President
you're
Trump. What did
impatient,
President Trump
and I
mean when he
think
said
that
get it done?
Israel, we have to be patient and trust that Israel will ultimately get it done. I mean, it's just they have the means to
That means
do it. It's just
eventually
going
do
to
a
take a long
ground
time,
campaign.
and they're going to do it
They're
by
going to eventually
with the
send
same
troops.
time preserving Jewish life. Now, you and I obviously don't agree on this, Dooovid. I think that they don't have to kill 10,000 Israelis. I think they can do it. It's just going to take a lot longer. Anyway, Dooovid, what else is on your mind?
Not much. I mean, saying like, yeah, I've been doing my research on consciousness, a lot of like the Vienna Circle, the philosophy of science. Um, yeah, I talk occasionally, like Twitter Spaces seem to be where it's at. And I had two big things. I had a big interview with Keith Woods, like Mario Nuffel. I finally got on Mario Nuffel, the guy out of Dubai who's like doing the biggest Twitter Spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably message and eventually get on. And it's I occasionally do Twitter Spaces, but it's
I think Keith Wood's kind of a real anti-Israel guy.
um
I think I've
he's
seen him on Twitter.
yeah, I mean he's like he's teaming up with Nick. Oh, so ironically, Nick Fuentes and the American First are having their annual gathering in Detroit next month, and I don't know exactly where. And like, I mean, you got to pay. It's like $200, but I mean, Keith Woods is kind of like a Pat Buchanan type figure. I think he's even Catholic, and he just sees the Jews as an ideological opponent, although he has Philo-Semitic.
He might be sort of in the Michael Jones camp, I would guess.
Well, no, I mean, Michael, because he's an Irish European nationalist. He opposes immigration and wants a
Well,
homogenous white
I mean, none
country.
of those people are my cup of tea. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
But I mean, Keith Woods is actually an intellectual, a reader, and so like he interviewed me. I had a big debate on Modern Day Debate with this interesting Daniel Hikwatkachu, and ironically, like the day the debate happened, the ADL like dropped a, a thing on him. But
mm-hmm.
ironically, this Texas Muslim who has been attacking Judaism, but he's a Harvard graduate. So I debated him, and he had all these strong arguments. Basically he's saying that he's anti-Zionist, but he says Judaism's the problem, and he had some like a combination of historical Islamic beliefs, and but ironically he combined it with like the stuff coming out of Harvard because he has like a master's degree and from the Harvard Divinity School. But I think most of the people I'm speaking to, they're already people who, I mean, that would request to speak to me, like Adam Green, or they're kind of like friendly intellectuals, but they've already determined that Jews are their ideological opponents, and they kind of just want information. They're not really looking to
Well,
debate.
Dooovid, why do
Like,
you think they request to speak to you?
because I'm honest, and they just want information. They want to
I think
understand.
because maybe they know you're anti-Zionist and you're anti-Israel.
No, they don't care about my beliefs. They just want information. They just want accurate information on Judaism. They
I
feel
see.
like I'm honest. I'm just gonna tell them what the stuff actually says or actual
You
information.
don't think it has anything to do with your political orientation?
Well, no, I
I
don't
mean,
think.
you're invited to speak on all these anti-Israel. Look. By the way, I'm
Well,
not.
I mean, you're disagreeing with my assessment. These are people who've already determined that the Jews, in totality,
Well,
are their
that's my point
ideological.
of it. That's why they have you on. You're like a friendly house Jew who can sort of lean in their direction. Now, look, my hands
No, they
aren't
just
clean.
want information. They don't talk to me like they
Oh, they
just
don't
want
talk
information.
politics with you? They never bring up
No, I
Israel
mean,
or
like I spoke to Keith
Judaism?
Woods, and he just asked me questions about the Talmud and Judaism
Okay,
for an
so
hour
then
and a
they
half.
are talking about Judaism. Look,
Well, I
my
mean,
hands
he
aren't.
wasn't debating. He just wanted information, and I guess he was speaking to me because he just wants a Jew who's going to tell it to him straight.
Okay.
And he didn't ask me my opinion.
My
He didn't
hands
really
aren't
care
clean
about
on this either, David, because I interviewed Kevin Barrett. I
recently.
also what?
I mean, we had this show together. I actually
No, I
spoke
had him
to him
on
like
just
3 months
I had
ago.
him on just solo, and it was pretty ruckus. And I also invited both him and Dr. Jones to join me as a three-way talk. And Dr. Jones only agreed to come on if I agreed in advance that Israel was committing genocide. And generally, I don't agree. I don't, it's like it reminds me of somebody on the far left. Only if you send us talking points will we come on with you. We have to know in advance what you're going to say, and that's just not how I roll. I'm not going to agree to something I don't agree with. Firstly, and secondly, I don't do conditions. I mean, either you come on or you don't. You can defend your position or not. Everybody gets a chance when I do a show to talk and to present their views, and the viewers will decide for themselves. So that didn't work out because I'm not going to play that kind of game. But I'm open to interviews. I'm interested in getting back into it.
Yeah, we didn't even get to the campus protest, but I'd say,
I
you
know.
know,
Let's just briefly touch on that. I mean, to me, this is no different than the Pussy Hat people, the George Floyd people who looted black businesses and burned black neighborhoods in a crystal nacht over the summer of 2020 against the black community. It goes back to the Vietnam War protesters. I remember David Horowitz on my show said that if there wasn't a Vietnam War, the left wing would have had to invent something. They are just professional protesters. These are the same hard left core people funded by international leftist sources. The same old people. I mean, I actually was out in Coolidge Corner in Brookline, here near where I live. I live in Boston, and they were out there rallying with their signs about Israel committing genocide. I was there I was doing an errand, and so I decided to go up and see what they're about. And it was the same old ashen-faced old ladies with their wrinkly looks and their hate and their faces etched in rage that were there back in the day when I showed up at an anti-Vietnam rally in the 1970s. They're literally the same people.
but
So
didn't they
that's
just have
all
like
this
10
is.
high schools walk out just this week? Didn't like 10 high schools have walkouts to join the MIT encampment?
Yeah, but the point is that there's also been a poll done that just was published showing that the vast majority of college students are not on board with this. It is a small, well financed, vocal group. And I say, like, hey, they're going to they're going to put Trump back in the White House. They're going to destroy what's left of this miserable, illegitimate regime in Washington. And it's going to be another summer of love. I don't think that they're idiotic. I mean, it's not. It's just
I would
about
I
the
would
same.
largely agree, although I personally think that of all of the protests over the last 5 years, Black Lives Matters, the Pussy Hat, whatever, that
Mhm.
actually the Palestinian cause is the most legitimate thing that they've protested.
I think it's the most illegitimate thing because it does. They're calling. First of all, they've already jumped the shark because they're showing that they're calling for the complete destruction of Israel. It would be one thing if they went out and said, "Oh, we don't like the fact that Israel's engaging in a
Or
war and the
just if,
people are
if they were
dying."
just protesting the U.S. involvement in arming,
Yeah,
or,
or if they were saying we support the two-state solution and we want to have a Palestinian state, I would disagree with it, but I'd understand that. But no, they're calling for the complete destruction of Israel, and they're now starting to burn the American flag. They are communists. That's all it is. This is the result of decades of leftist professors, well-financed, taking the high ground in these campuses and in our culture. That's
you
all
know,
this is, and that's how we should see it.
yeah, I mean, but
There's very
unfortunately,
little to do with Israel. They hate Israel because it's capitalist, and they
well,
hate Israel because it's Jewish, not because of any other reason. They don't give a damn about
well, if I,
Palestinian people. If they cared about that, they would have said something about the slaughter of the people of Aleppo when Syria went in and murdered 30,000 people. You want to talk about a heavy entrance, and they don't care about their own soldiers.
well, you might be
Anyway,
right on that. If they did actually care about Palestinians, it would be the most legitimate thing they've done. But without arguing on that point,
well, and if they cared about a peaceful solution that would include the Israel as a sovereign state. So I think that they have shown their true nature of what they're about, and the vast majority of Americans, liberal and conservative, left and right, don't agree. Anyway, Dooovid,
let me just make this last point because we agreed that unfortunately, this is going to be a forever war, that these protests are likely to continue into
and
elections.
a
And
pox on their house. Anyway, Dooovid, thanks as always for joining me. We should talk about maybe doing a couple of interviews together, so it would be, with other
oh yeah,
people.
reach out. I've been doing less and less streaming because
Me too. I mean, I've been busy, but we could do a couple of three ways and
I
maybe.
basically have said yes to everybody who's asked, and very few people asked. But if you
Mhm.
reach out and want to talk, let me know. But God bless, and glad to see you active. And
Thank
like
you.
I did appreciate you getting on Ethan Ralph, and you
He's good. I mean, I really enjoyed that. He does a good job. He's a kill stream. Yep.
might saying look into I know you just said restreaming the platforms, but you could consider Twitter Spaces also.
I should also mention as a little shameless plug, my
Oh
new
yeah,
book.
I watched like 10 of your interviews on that book, not just Ethan Ralph, but like I still follow your content, and I've seen like
Thank you.
10 of your
The
interviews.
Anti-Semitic Imagination is available on Amazon.
Do you have another book coming out? I mean, that was always I respected that you're staying active and
I
writing.
am. I'm not. I'm probably not one dealing with Israel. It's going to be more of an America book. All right, David. Thanks so much.